how to save and invest for children here in Japan is probably one of the more common questions I get. And it's also a very topical one right now because the best option for that is ending this year. Let's talk about it. So when it comes to saving money for your children or for investing for your children, for their educational expenses or for their life expenses going forward, there are basically three main options in Japan. So you can either save cash in a bank account in the child's name, and that has some advantages and disadvantages. You can buy insurance. So educational insurance is one of the more common ones,学資保険, we'll talk about that as well. Or, and this is the one that's going away, you can open a Junior NISA account and invest in the child's name. Now, let's talk about cash. So investing cash in an account in your child's name isn't a great option. The only reason to do it would be if you had, say, some relatives maybe that wanted to contribute to the child's educational expenses. And they didn't want to worry about gift tax and so on, so they could give money to the child, you could put it in the child's account, that would belong to the child, and then later when they get older they can use that money. We'll talk about gift tax later in the video. It's very important to be aware of it. Now, the disadvantage of saving cash is that it doesn't grow. Bank accounts in Japan pay basically no interest. You're looking at people getting excited about 0.02% interest, and inflation is going to hack away at the value of that money. So this is probably not a great option. The second option is to get some kind of insurance, and this is very popular in Japan, mainly because people don't really understand investing, and insurance is much more familiar. It's seen as a more sensible, stable option. And generally with insurance, you'll get plans like this from Aflac. So I don't want to pick on Aflac, but this is it's a common example of what this kind of plan would look like. So you would pay in a certain amount, monthly normally, and for 10 years or 15 years or 20 years or whatever, and you'd get something like a 7% return for decades of paying in, which is not fantastic compared to investing it in the stock market, for example. Now, the advantages of the insurance route is it does come with life insurance protection normally. So, for example, if the parent died, then they wouldn't need to continue paying the plan and the child would receive the entirety of the plan. There is a slight tax deduction that you can ask the insurance company about. Basically, you can probably deduct a small amount of the insurance premium from your taxes. Very small amount. I mean, almost not worth mentioning. And that's about it. I guess the other advantage is that it's quite easy to sell to your spouse if your spouse is nervous about investing in the stock market, and possibly to in-laws. So often the grandparents will offer to pay for one of these insurances, and if they're paying for it, then they can make the decision. So that's my policy. But the best option in Japan currently is to open a Junior NISA account and invest in the stock market. And there's two advantages to this. So the first one is that by investing in the child's name, when they become an adult, they get that money, it actually belongs to them. And investing in Junior NISA, the capital gains and so on, the dividends and so on, are tax-free until the child reaches the age of 18. Now, the problem is that these accounts were only set up for a period of 10 years, and that period ends at the end of this year, and the government has decided not to extend it and not to replace it with anything else. So Junior NISA is going away, and it's not going to be replaced with anything else. With a Junior NISA account, it's a little bit complicated because basically you have to give the money to the child. So normally what you would do is you would open a Junior NISA account. Only a guardian, so a parent or legal guardian, can do this. And you would transfer money from the child's bank account into the Junior NISA, and then in the Junior NISA you would buy either mutual funds or Japanese listed stocks. And those would grow, hopefully, over time. And until the child's 18th birthday, those would be tax-free. You can actually take the money out anytime, but obviously it's better to leave it in for as long as possible to allow it to grow. The annual contribution limit is 800,000 yen. So if you opened an account this year, you could pay in up to 800,000 yen and invest that money for your child. There's no minimum contribution. So you could open the account and not pay anything in. You could pay in 1,000 yen or 10,000 yen or as much as you can up to that 800,000 yen limit. One other benefit of opening the Junior NISA account is that alongside the NISA account, you also get a Junior taxable account, which is a normal broker account that does incur capital gains and dividend taxes, but that it can be owned by a child. And this might be the easiest way to get a junior trading account for your children. So you could give them money and they could invest it in their taxable account. There's no tax advantage, but that money would belong to them and that it could grow over time into the future. Now, quick note about Americans. So if your children have American citizenship, they are bound by all the IRS regulations that make things difficult for Americans in general. What that means is that they should not buy mutual funds in their Junior NISA account. They could buy individual Japanese stocks. That would be okay. But those investments would not be tax-free with regards to the IRS. So the IRS would not consider them to be tax-free, but it might be worth doing anyway. If you have children and if you have some spare money that you could invest on their behalf in a Junior NISA account, I really do recommend opening a Junior NISA account and doing that, because this year is the last chance for you to do that. I think in order to get all the paperwork through in time, you'd probably want to do that fairly soon, and certainly by the end of the summer. Just get all that through and get it all set up. If you're enjoying the video, if you want to get more information like this about personal finance, about investing, about life in Japan, please do subscribe. It really helps us and allows us to keep making more videos. Now, there is another option, which is that you're allowed to pay for family members' living expenses, including their educational expenses. So a lot of the time, it's going to make most sense for the parents to invest the money, maybe using the new NISA account, which has quite a large annual contribution limit, 3.6 million yen. And then once the child, decides to go to university or has some kind of expense, you can just give them the money. And as long as that's going on their living expenses or their educational expenses, that wouldn't count towards gift tax. And then on top of that, you've also got the gift tax allowance as well. So that gives you a lot of flexibility. And I think for most people, that's going to be a decent option as well. We do have a blog post on this topic with a bit more detail. There's also this thing where grandparents or parents can give a lump sum to a child, a large lump sum, and that money can be used towards educational expenses and so on. And it's not taxed, either gift tax or inheritance tax. But it's quite complicated, and you'd probably want to look at the article if you're interested. So what are we doing? So my grandchildren, 3 of them are in Japan. The other 2 are abroad. The ones in Japan, we did have their parents open Junior NISA accounts for them. We've been paying in to the Junior NISA accounts. My eldest granddaughter, she's had the longest. And she has almost 6 million yen in her Junior NISA account. That's contributions and growth. And her little sister, who's 4, she has about 3 million yen in her Junior NISA, and then the youngest, who's 2, has about 2 million yen in his Junior NISA. And the nice thing about this is that those investments will continue to grow over the next 7 years for my eldest granddaughter, or the next 14 years for her little sister, or 16 years for the little brother. And that should end up with a fairly decent amount that will help them if they decide to go to university or if they decide to do something else. That money will become theirs. I'm hoping to kind of brainwash them so that they take that money and then immediately put it into a new NISA account or something similar in order to save for their retirement, and so they don't have to worry about that quite so much. But we'll see. We'll see. The danger is that the money is theirs, so they can actually do whatever they want with it. So it's worth taking the time to teach your children about personal finance if you're going to set up this kind of investment for them. Now that the Junior NISA is ending, we will consider contributing to their taxable accounts. So we haven't quite decided on that one, but I think it makes sense because it avoids gift tax. So gift tax in Japan exists, and it's actually worth being aware of. So everyone living in Japan can receive up to 1.1 million yen a year in gifts before they have to pay tax. If you receive more than that, you would have to start paying gift tax, and gift tax gets quite expensive. So if you're giving money to family or if you're receiving money from people, just keep an eye on it and make sure you don't go over that gift tax limit, because gift tax is quite expensive and gets quite big quite quickly. So you want to avoid that if possible. And of course, as we mentioned before, living expenses, including educational expenses for family members, doesn't count as gift tax. So quite famously, a few years ago, Hatoyama, the prime minister at the time, had to answer questions about just how much money he was getting from his mother, and he claimed it was a living allowance, even though it was a ridiculous amount of money, if I remember correctly. It's like 20 million yen a month or something. So that was a bit of a political scandal there. But it just goes to show that if you're paying for your family's living expenses, their rent, for example, their food, or their education expenses, that's fine. Doesn't count towards the gift tax limit. So what are you doing for if you have children here in Japan and you're trying to save for their future educational needs or their future life needs? What are you doing? Are you saving cash? Do you have some kind of insurance policy? Or have you been using Junior NISA? And if you haven't, would you consider opening a Junior NISA account this year, because it's your last chance to do so? Please put any questions in the comments, and I'll see you in the next video.